For 11 years, I believed I had the perfect marriage. My wife Emily wasn't just my partner. She was my best friend, my biggest supporter, and the person I trusted more than anyone else in the world. We met in college when life was still uncertain and everything felt like a gamble. I was studying finance, trying to figure out how to build a future that didn't involve living paycheck to paycheck forever. Emily was studying marketing. She had a bright personality that could light up an entire room. People were drawn to her naturally, but what made her special to me was something deeper. She believed in me. When I told her about my dream of starting my own company one day, she didn't laugh or say it was unrealistic like others did. Instead, she smiled and said something I never forgot. "Then I guess I'll be the wife of a future CEO." At the time, it felt like a joke. But Emily always had a way of saying things that made the impossible feel possible. Years passed. After graduation, life hit us hard like it hits everyone. Bills. Jobs. Stress. I worked long hours at a small firm trying to learn everything I could about business. Emily got a job at a marketing agency. We weren't rich. Not even close. But we were happy. Every night we would cook dinner together in our tiny apartment kitchen. Sometimes we burned the food. Sometimes we ended up ordering cheap takeout because we were too tired to cook. But we always laughed. Those were the moments that made me believe we were different from other couples. Stronger. More connected. 5 years later, I finally took the risk I had always talked about. I started my own company. It was terrifying. For the first year, I barely slept. Money was tight, and failure felt like it was always waiting just around the corner. But Emily never complained. She stayed up late with me while I worked at the kitchen table surrounded by papers and spreadsheets. Sometimes she would bring me coffee and kiss my forehead. "You're going to make this work," she would whisper. And eventually, I did. The company grew. Slowly at first, then faster. By the time we had been married 10 years, life looked completely different from the way it started. We had a beautiful house. Nice cars. Financial stability. Looking back, it felt like we had built everything together. Or at least that's what I believed. Until the night everything began to fall apart. It was a Thursday evening when it happened. One of those long, exhausting days that makes you feel like the week will never end. I had stayed late at the office finishing paperwork with my business partner Daniel. Daniel and I had been working together for almost 7 years. He was the operations side of the business while I handled strategy and clients. We trusted each other. At least I thought we did. Around 8 p.m., I finally packed up my things and walked toward the parking lot. The air was cold and quiet. I got into my car, turned the key. And nothing happened. The engine made a strange clicking sound. I tried again. Still nothing. "Great," I muttered. I stepped out of the car and popped the hood even though I had absolutely no idea what I was looking at. That's when I heard a voice behind me. "Car trouble?" I turned and saw Daniel walking toward me with his jacket slung over his shoulder. "Looks like it," I sighed. He leaned over the engine for a moment, then shook his head. "Battery's probably dead." I groaned. Perfect timing. Daniel laughed. "Relax. I'll give you a ride home." I hesitated for a second. But honestly, I was too tired to argue. "All right," I said. We got into his car and started driving. At first, the conversation was completely normal. We talked about a client meeting scheduled for the following week. About a new marketing campaign. About random business problems. The kind of conversation we had almost every day. Then about halfway through the drive, Daniel said something that made my stomach twist. It was such a casual comment that at first I didn't even react. But the words echoed in my mind. "By the way," he said, keeping his eyes on the road, how long has Emily been helping Jason with his projects? My head turned slowly. What do you mean? Daniel glanced at me. His expression changed instantly. Wait, you didn't know? My chest tightened. Know what? For a few seconds, the car was completely silent. Then Daniel laughed awkwardly. Ah, maybe I misunderstood something. My heart started beating faster. Daniel, I said quietly, what are you talking about? He hesitated. Then he sighed. I just assumed you knew. Knew what? Daniel gripped the steering wheel. I saw Emily and Jason together a few times over the past couple months. Jason. The name hit me like a sudden punch. Jason wasn't just some random guy. He was one of our biggest clients. A wealthy investor who worked closely with our company. And he definitely didn't need help from my wife with projects. Where did you see them? I asked. Daniel hesitated again. Restaurants mostly. A couple of times at the hotel lounge near downtown. Something cold spread through my chest. Emily had told me she had been spending more time with friends lately. Girls' nights. Shopping trips. Coffee meetups. I had believed every word. Because why wouldn't I? She was my wife. The woman I trusted more than anyone. Daniel looked uncomfortable. I figured you were aware, he said. They looked pretty close. I forced a small laugh. Yeah, she probably just helps him with marketing ideas. But even as the words left my mouth, they sounded weak. Daniel didn't reply. And the silence inside the car suddenly felt heavy. For the rest of the drive, my mind was racing. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation. But something inside me, a quiet instinct I couldn't ignore, started whispering a terrifying possibility. What if my wife had been lying to me? When we pulled up in front of my house, I felt a strange knot in my stomach. Daniel parked the car. Before I got out, he said something softly. Hey, if I said something that caused problems, I'm sorry. I shook my head. No. It's fine. But deep down, I knew something was very wrong. As I walked toward the front door of my house, the lights were on inside. Emily was probably in the kitchen or living room, waiting for me. Just like always. But for the first time in 11 years, I felt afraid to walk through that door. Because a single car ride had just planted a question in my mind that I couldn't ignore. And that question was about to change everything. For a few seconds, I just stood outside the front door of my own house. The warm yellow light from inside shone through the windows. Everything looked normal. Peaceful. The same house I had walked into thousands of times before. But that night felt different. Daniel's words kept repeating in my head. I saw Emily and Jason together, they looked pretty close. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe they had just run into each other. Maybe Daniel misunderstood. There were 100 possible explanations. But none of them stopped the uneasy feeling in my chest. Finally, I opened the door. The smell of dinner immediately filled the air. Emily's voice came from the kitchen. Is that you? Yeah, I replied. She walked into the hallway a second later, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. And for a moment, everything felt normal again. Emily smiled the way she always did when she saw me. You're late today. She stepped closer and kissed me on the cheek. I made pasta. Your favorite. Her voice sounded completely natural. Relaxed. Happy. Nothing about her behavior suggested that anything was wrong. But for the first time in our entire marriage, I found myself studying her face carefully. Looking for something I had never looked for before. Guilt. Nervousness. Anything. But Emily just looked like Emily. Beautiful, calm, and comfortable in our home. How was your day? She asked. I placed my keys on the table. Busy. She smiled. When is it not? Normally we would laugh at that. But I didn't. Instead, I said something I never thought I would ask. Did you see Jason today? The question came out casually, but inside my chest my heart was beating faster. Emily paused for a second. Just a second. But I noticed it. Her eyes shifted slightly before she answered. No, she said. Why? I shrugged. He emailed earlier about the new investment proposal. She nodded. Oh. Then she turned back toward the kitchen. Dinner is almost ready. The conversation ended there. But my mind didn't. Stop thinking. That tiny pause before she answered. It was probably nothing. People pause all the time. Right? We sat down at the dinner table a few minutes later. Emily talked about her day. About a friend she met for coffee. About a new clothing store that opened downtown. Normally I loved listening to her stories. But that night I could barely focus. My mind kept drifting back to Daniel's comment. Restaurants. Hotel lounge. Multiple times. I glanced at Emily across the table. She looked relaxed. Laughing. Completely normal. And that made the situation even more confusing. Because if something was really happening, how could she act so calm? After dinner, Emily started clearing the plates. Go relax, she said. You look tired. I'll do the dishes. I almost said yes. But something inside me wanted to stay close. So I followed her into the kitchen. Need help? She smiled. You can dry the plates. We stood side by side at the sink. Something about the situation felt strangely familiar. We had done this thousands of times before. Talking about random things while washing dishes. But that night, the silence between us felt heavier. Finally, I asked another question. Have you been seeing Jason recently? Emily froze. Her hand stopped moving in the sink. Then she turned slightly. Why are you asking about him? Her voice wasn't angry. But it definitely sounded more serious now. I tried to keep my tone relaxed. Just curious. She looked at me for a moment. Then she went back to washing the plates. I ran into him once or twice at a cafe near downtown, she said. That answer made my stomach tighten. Recently? A few weeks ago. That wasn't exactly a lie. But it also wasn't a clear answer. And suddenly I realized something strange. In 11 years of marriage, I had never questioned Emily's words before. Not once. But now my mind was analyzing every sentence. Looking for hidden meaning. Why? She asked again. I forced a small smile. No reason. The rest of the evening passed quietly. We watched television. Talked about a movie. Normal couple things. But the doubt inside my head refused to disappear. Later that night, after Emily fell asleep, I was still awake. Staring at the ceiling. My mind replayed every conversation we had during the past few months. Every time she said she was meeting friends. Every late evening she came home. Every moment that I never questioned before. Suddenly, they all felt different. Suspicious. But I hated myself for even thinking that way. Emily had supported me through everything. She stood beside me when I had nothing. When the business was struggling. When life was uncertain. She believed in me when nobody else did. The idea that she could betray me felt impossible. And yet, Daniel had no reason to lie. Around midnight, I quietly got out of bed. Emily was sleeping peacefully. Her breathing slow and calm. I walked into the living room and sat on the couch. My eyes drifted toward the kitchen counter. That's where Emily usually left her phone when she went to sleep. I could see it sitting there. The screen dark. For a long time, I just stared at it. A battle was happening inside my head. Part of me said, "Don't do this. If you trust her, trust her." But another voice whispered something else. What if Daniel was right? Finally, I stood up. Slowly. Quietly. And walked toward the phone. My hand hesitated above it. This felt like crossing a line. But at that moment, I needed to know the truth. I picked it up. The screen lit up. Locked. Of course. Emily had always used a password. But I suddenly remembered something. Years ago, when we first got married, she told me the code. Our wedding anniversary. Maybe she never changed it. My fingers slowly typed the numbers. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the phone unlocked. My heart started pounding. I opened the messages. Most of them were normal. Friends. Family. Group chats. But then I saw a name that made my stomach drop. Jason. And beside his name, a long thread of messages. My hand trembled as I opened it. The first message I saw was from earlier that evening. Jason. I miss you already. Emily's reply appeared below. Tonight was perfect. The room suddenly felt like it was spinning. And in that moment, my worst fear started becoming real. My hands were shaking as I stared at the messages on Emily's phone. For a moment, I hoped I had misunderstood. Maybe tonight was perfect meant a meeting. Maybe it was something innocent. But the deeper I scrolled, the more the truth revealed itself. There were hundreds of messages. Photos. Plans to meet. Inside jokes I didn't understand. And one message that felt like someone had driven a knife straight through my chest. Jason had written, "Sometimes I wish you had met me before you met him." Emily replied a few minutes later. "Life is complicated, but being with you feels right." I sat there on the couch in complete silence. My entire marriage suddenly felt like a lie. For 11 years I had trusted Emily without question. I worked hard to build a life for us. A house. A future. Security. And while I was doing all of that, she was secretly building another life with someone else. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to cry. Not yet. Instead, I kept reading. The messages went back almost 8 months. 8 months of lies. 8 months of secret dinners, hotel lounges, and meetings she called coffee with friends. Daniel had been right. They had been meeting regularly. The moment that hurt the most wasn't the messages themselves. It was the realization that Emily had looked into my eyes every day and lied. I slowly locked the phone and placed it back on the counter exactly where it had been. Then I sat in the darkness of the living room for a long time. Thinking. Feeling everything at once: anger, heartbreak, disbelief. Around 2 a.m, I finally stood up and walked back into the bedroom. Emily was still asleep. Peaceful. Calm. Completely unaware that her secret had just been exposed. I lay down beside her but didn't sleep. Instead, I stared at the ceiling and thought about the life we had built together. About the promises we made. About the trust one had given her so freely. And about how easily she had broken it. Morning came slowly. When